Hey guys, this is Caleb Andes with the Process Outdoors, and today we're talking arrow performance. Now, arrow performance specifically as it relates to FOC or front of center. So, uh, me personally, about 5 or 6 years ago, made a huge mistake and got my wife out into the outdoors and ended up setting her up with a 26.5 inch arrow with a 100 grain broadhead on it. I thought that cut on contact would have been enough, and what eventually ended up happening was she rattled in a good buck and stuck it in the shoulder, never to be found. With kids and busy schedules, she took the next 6 years off, so it's been a long time coming for me to get her back out in the field. And this year, she has some interest to get back out in the field, and I am absolutely not going to make the same mistake. So, what we have here today is I have some visuals and some tricks for you guys, as well as a little bit of math on front of center, and we'll end the video with a penetration test through some cardboard, just to show you how impactful front of center is to penetration. So stick with us, and in the meantime, hit the intro. So what I have here is two of my wife's arrows, and these are what we'll essentially be playing with here today. And one of them has a 200 grain field point on it, and the other simply has a 100 grain field point on it. Now you might think, what's really the difference from that? And really it's a huge difference from a front of center standpoint. But before we talk about that specific difference, I want to get into what exactly is front of center and how does it impact the arrow. So first and foremost, front of center, how do you calculate it? So behind me here, I'll try and do my best to explain, but the visual down here is referencing our equation right here. So it is 100 times A minus L divided by 2, all of that over L. And as you can see down here, L being the length of the arrow, and specifically that is the end of your insert to the U of your nock. So right where the string hits your nock. And that is your L distance. And then A is actually the distance from your center point. Now a lot of times I like to just make a reference with my finger, because after that you're kind of just splitting hairs. So this is my center point of this arrow, and A is going to be from here on back to the U of the nock. So just to give you a quick reference before we dive into the details, kind of interesting, that's a 100 grain point, and this is a 200 grain point. You can see how much of a difference 100 grains on the front will add. We'll talk a little bit about it more in a bit, but taking weight away from the back is even more impactful than adding to the front. So keep that in mind. But for now, let's walk through the equation. So this 100 grain tipped arrow is going to be our first calculation, and that distance A between the center point and the end of the beginning of the arrow, the nock, was 16.5 inches. So it was shorter because my finger was moved back further to the nock than what our 200 grain point arrow was, and that ended up being 18.5. So really, what's the difference here from a front of center standpoint, and what does that really mean? So I'll tell you, it's huge. So we can do the math quickly, or I'll just flip the poster board for you. So the 100 grain field tip is roughly 13.5 front of center, whereas your 200 grain field tip is over 21 point front of center. And anytime you get into the 20s, that's a huge deal. Dr. Ashby Foundations has done a lot of research on the different factors of penetration for arrows, and front of center being one of the key 12 factors. anything over 20 is extremely lethal by their means. So this is an amazing trade-off for this. But math is one thing. Let's get into some of what we have here to show you exactly how front of center works and how it helps with penetration with the arrow. So we're gonna go ahead and show you some main concepts, and they'll be a little bit exaggerated because we're going to use a dowel rod for one of them, and we're going to use a heavy point weight and no point weight for the other. But the exaggeration will essentially give us a better idea of exactly what happens when an arrow hits an animal. But before that, what I really want to do is I really want to break down what are the two components of the arrow, being the backside here and the front side of the arrow. What are their two main purposes on the arrow? And the answer to that is the front end here is all about penetration. It is driving the arrow and it's pushing it. And the back end is all about control. So this is considered the back lever arm, and this is the front lever arm. The shorter the front lever arm, the better the penetration, and the longer the back lever arm, the straighter flight. So if you want to improve your arrow flight, increase your front of center. If you want to improve your penetration, increase your front of center. Having a smaller front of center distance here on this lever arm on the front, which is essentially increasing your front of center percentage, will effectively pull the arrow through the animal. So when it hits, your arrow is not going to be pushed through the animal from the back end, which is going to cause deflection in the arrow and lack of penetration, but your arrow will be pulling the rest of the arrow through the animal. So two components of the arrow as it pertains to front of center, and rule of thumb, the further you can get your finger this way on front of center, heavier the tip, and the bigger we can get the back lever arm, better flight, better penetration. Very simple. All right, so the first demonstration we're going to go through is with this wood block. So I've seen this on plenty of YouTube videos, so I'm totally ripping them off. But it was one of those things where I saw it on their videos and it really just made me click, right? It showed me exactly what I was looking to see to understand front of center. That being the smaller the front lever arm, meaning the heavier the point weight, the more it pulls your arrow through the animal. So what we're going to do here is I have a hole drilled in this 2x4, and I'm going to take the arrow and I'm going to flex it inside the hole, and we're going to time how long it takes to go through with no point weight, meaning the front of center is absolutely abysmal, right? And with the Danielle's 200 grain field tip on it. So I have my watch here, and I'll go ahead and tap it when I flex the arrow, but let's go ahead and see the difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to line the insert up underneath with the end of it, and you can tell if I'm cheating or not on how far I'm flexing it. But when I let go, I'm going to go ahead and hit the start, and we'll see how long it takes to drive through our animal using gravity as that force. All right, that was about 2.43 seconds. Let's take a couple other samples. .42. I think I'll stick at that. That's pretty consistent, believe it or not. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this 200 grain field tip, screw it into the bottom here, effectively increasing our front of center on this 26-inch arrow. And we're going to go ahead and do it all over again and see how long it takes for it to drive through our animal with a 200 grain field point and 21% front of center. 2.27, and you'll be able to tell if I'm pulling this one a little bit further back than the other in the video, but 2.16. One more time, just in case we didn't get it just right here. 2.07. So effectively, it's showing us exactly what front of center has been telling us, and that is, hey, anytime that you have more mass in the front, it will pull that arrow through the animal, and it also helps correct the deflection quicker. With that bigger backward lever arm, it encourages straighter flight as well as helps drive the arrow through the animal. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next one, and the first example was around penetration, and it kind of gave us an overview of exactly how the arrow is going to pull its way through the animal with a higher front of center. This next one is kind of going to explain the why for us, and that is I have an overly exaggerated arrow here, which is a dowel rod, and I've ended up sharpening the tip just a little bit, and I have a plastic tube with some packaging tape on it. This is going to be our animal, this is going to be our hide, and this is going to be our arrow. And what I'm going to show is when we shoot an arrow with a bad front of center, say this is our arrow length here, the front of center here is going to be pretty much dead center because we don't have any point weight on it, right? And so this is the distance we're playing with, bad front of center, compared to if we shoot an arrow, we'll say, for example, it's cut off right here. I'm going to hold it right here. This is going to be my total arrow length, or L, with a better front of center. And we're going to take a look at the difference in deflection from the different values of front of center and see how that impacts arrow flight. So this goes a lot into arrow integrity as well when it hits the target. So this is an example of an arrow with terrible front of center, and I'm trying to poke through the tape, and you can see the arrow bending. So when it goes into the animal with a lower percent front of center, meaning the front lever arm is almost as big as the back lever arm, you can see that the arrow's flexing, and quite frankly, I'll probably break this dowel rod before I can get it through this packaging tape. There seems to be no way that it's going to go through. It's too flimsy. There's not enough integrity on the front of the arrow to really drive it through there. And that's not what you want to see in your arrow, because when you shoot the animal, all of this bowing of the arrow actually happens, and it takes away from your penetration. So it's hitting the sidewall of the animal, and it's not allowing you to have that bone penetrating force, and it's taking away from penetration. So let's move it up a little bit, see if we can get it to go through. There it goes. Okay, so increased front of center percent just a little bit, and I was able to get it through. Let's see what it looks like on the other side. Same packaging tape for all you non-believers out there. When we have a front of center a lot better. No bowing in the arrow, nice straight trajectory, straight through the animal. So, excellent example of when an arrow hits the animal, higher front of center is leaving, this is my arrow here, arrow length. If the front of center is right here, because we have a heavy point weight, this is all that can bow right here in this area, and that's not going to bow. That's going to drive through the animal. But if our front of center is back here, we have all of this distance right here that can bow as it's entering the animal, reducing penetration. These are tricks. These are visuals. You could call them a gimmick if you want, but really the real way to test it is through science. And The Ashby Foundation has made a career with Dr. Ed Ashby on proving these things out in the wilds of Africa and in game all over America as well, including wild hogs. And so there's no better way to show it and to prove it than to do a penetration test. So I gathered up as much cardboard as I could and stacked about, 8 or 9, 10 sheets of cardboard together and put it in front of my target. And I shot my wife's bow here in the basement, and she's left-handed, I'm right-handed. It was a little goofy, but I was pretty accurate. And the results were pretty impressive. So we'll cut to some of those shots, and hopefully you can see the measuring tape in the footage, but I'll talk about the results here after we cut into those shots. Okay, so the shots are done, and I didn't shoot the wall. And the first 3 shots were of the 200 grain field point, which I don't know if you can see it on the footage, but it does have a bigger diameter than the 100 grain field point. It extends to a greater diameter than the diameter of the shaft of the arrow. So I'll put that in its corner, but I think the results will speak for itself. So the first 3 shots were the 200 grain field point, and then the last 4 shots were the 100 grain field point. I took 4 shots because I realized on the first and second shot, I ended up shooting a little bit off from the center in the same area as the first shot, so I just wanted to keep it consistent because I did have a black hole target behind it. So the results were as follows. Let me check my notes here so I don't mess it up. The 200 grain field point had a 16-inch, a 15.5-inch, and a 16-inch penetration. So it was roughly here into the target through multiple layers of cardboard and into the target behind it. And the 100 grain field point had 13-inch, 13-inch, 14-inch, or 13-inch, 14-inch, 13-inch. So we're looking at a difference of about that for penetration. So doesn't seem like much, but if you take the averages and you do the math, it's a 20% increase in penetration. And that 20% increase in penetration could mean a lot of things, not just from a distance standpoint, but it could also mean maybe you're blowing through that scapula, or maybe you're blowing through the rib on the front end that's going to allow you to get to that second lung on the back end and make a all-night and morning nightmare track job into a piece of cake no-brainer. I heard that slob fall down in the creek bottom. This could be a huge deal. And as hunters, from an ethical standpoint, we should be doing everything in our power, not trying to enforce my values upon you, but it would seem obvious we'd want to do everything in our power to make the most ethical, quick, and just lethal kill possible. And that starts with having the best performing arrow at your hands. So what I ended up doing was I took my wife's arrow that had a 100 grain field point on it, and I put a 200 grain field point on it. And I got her 200 grain cut on contact 2-blade broadheads, and I increased her penetration into an animal by 20%. We'll round up from 18. So putting all that together showed you a couple visuals that proved it out a little bit. Hopefully that helped, but I still feel that a penetration test really brings it on home. 18% improvement in penetration. If you can change anything about your setup right now and keep the tuning of your bow the same, which I did end up paper tuning her bow to both these arrows and shooting bullets. I actually bought a new paper tuner, which that's probably going to be the next video, is the paper tuner I bought is about $15 off Amazon, and it was awesome. So keep a lookout for that coming up next. But if you can do anything to improve your game at this point in the season, think about the arrows you're shooting. So encourage everyone to take a look at their arrows, take a look at some of the heavier points and the cut-on contact broadheads, and see if that's not the right decision for you based off of what you are shooting. I would say at the very least, I encourage everyone to get their arrow, get out a tape measure, and measure the, if I can balance it, the L to the A, and do some quick math and see where you stand. 15% is good. It's what a lot of the elk hunters shoot. They still want not so heavy arrows, nice and fast for some of those longer shots. But pushing it up more to the 20 range is where you're really going to see those huge bone penetrating thresholds being broken. And encourage everyone to see what their FOC is, because arrow performance is huge, especially if you're looking to take a new woman hunter out in the woods or a new youth bow hunter out into the woods. You would be doing them an absolute disservice if you didn't try and take a look at the arrows and see exactly what they're shooting to make sure that they have the best opportunity possible to get maximum penetration and key in and get that kill of a lifetime this deer season. So that's all I got for you on Front and Center. If you guys like the content we're putting out, find it mildly educational, or at least able to put up with it, feel free to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you can keep up with us throughout the season. We're going to be posting updates throughout the season. I don't know if you saw, but on our Facebook page, we had one of our youth hunters already harvest a buck on his grandfather's farm, which was an excellent deal, and that was guided by Levi Sandquist and Andrew Davis from the Process Outdoors. And I have my son Wyatt out in the field right now trying to get his first deer, and I know that TPO team member Matt Kingsley has his son out in the field trying to get his first deer as well, and the season hasn't even started. So it's going to be a great year. Again, hit that subscribe button if you find this content mildly engaging, and hit the notification bell, and we'll be seeing you guys soon.